Okay, welcome everyone. Hope you can hear me and see me, and I think you can all see my screen. So give people a teeny bit more time in case they're still connecting. And yeah, so my name's Chris. I'm Senior Developer Evangelist here at Mapbox. I'm joined today by Connor. Connor, you want to say hello?
Yep, I'm Connor. I'm a developer relations intern here at Mapbox ever since January.
Awesome. And together we are your developer relations team. So we do a lot of things here. In addition to these webinars, we moderate and coordinate for the Discord server, which we encourage you to join. You can meet other Mapbox developers and some Mapbox employees hanging out in there, and hopefully be able to find some help with some of your technical questions or general questions about Mapbox. We also build and manage and maintain a lot of our developer tools, which is why we're here today. Well, without further ado, I guess before I move any further, for those of you who are just joining, make sure you open up your chat and by all means ask questions. Connor will be watching the chat and will interrupt with some, basically to pass your question along if you have any during the presentation. So Mapbox, you're probably already familiar with it, with the company if you're here watching this. If you're not, we do a lot more than just maps, and we have a full suite of location-based services to support your location app. In addition to beautiful and performant map rendering, we also have a very robust search service, and we also power navigation, and then lots of data products on top of that may be helpful for your data processing or your just basically in support of your apps. So go ahead and check out the rest of our offering over at mapbox.com. Here's our plug to join the Discord server. So Discord server now has over 4,000 members, probably a few hundred active members, on a daily basis. We just upgraded a little chat GPT bot in there, so you can go in and ask questions, and it'll answer with code snippets and things like that. So by all means, go ahead and give it a try. But it's also a great place to kind of get announcements from Mapbox and find your smaller crew of people who are working on the same types of technologies. So there's like channels for React and React Native. There's channels for iOS and Android development, and then an API channel, that sort of thing. So go ahead and check out the Discord. And what are we going to do today? So spatial developer tools. So I've been a spatial developer for probably a decade now. And Mapbox has a whole suite of smaller tools that just come in handy when you're working with spatial data, and they're also just helpful visual tools to understand how our APIs work and grok them a little bit faster. So we're just going to do a really quick rundown of a lot of different things today, and I'll talk a little bit from my experience about how I use them, and also maybe shout out some of the bells and whistles, because I've had a hand, Connor and I have both had a hand in improving them and developing them. So by all means, jump in with questions if you have any, but we're gonna start quickly with the location helper. Right before I get to that, if you go to docs.mapbox.com/resources/dev-tools, you'll find this little index. So we're always adding new things to this because there are things that have been built over the years that are in various stages of support or various stages of whether they have been published meaningfully or more as like little experiments. So Connor and I actually will take some of these things that were published more as experiments and kind of spruce them up and make them a little more established. But this is a great place to go to start to kind of see what we have to offer. So go ahead and check that out. Okay, so the first item on the list is the location helper. Let's bring that up. I'm going to search for location helper. The first thing on the list here is Mapbox's location helper. And here we go. So when you open the location helper, you'll see a sidebar with a lot of panels of numbers in it, but effectively this is a great way to just sort of get camera positions. So if you're starting, a lot of times the very first time you encounter geographic coordinates when you're developing either a mobile or on web is you need a starting point for your map, right? So we have all these great tutorials and things to get you started, but they're all going to start in New York or San Francisco or some other city, and you want the view to be where you want it to be. So then you have to go out to the internet and find the latitude longitude coordinates for a town that you care about. So if I were to zoom in here, for example, you can see that the The center point is changing as I move around the map. So this is just a useful tool to kind of help you get the map view. And usually most of the time people just need like a center point and a zoom level. And so we can see the zoom level here, and you can get those nice little incremental zoom levels. And this saves you when you're doing this just with code, you have to like change the code, save it, and then reload your browser, reload your environment, and kind of see where that view is. This will help you kind of fine tune it, right? So I can say I want this to be exactly my view. And then on top of that, if you start doing interesting camera positions like pitching and bearing, you'll start to get those numbers too. And each of them has a little copy button, so you can just quickly grab this and move it back into your code. So that's kind of fun. And the other thing you can do here is bounds, right? So a lot of times you don't just need a center point, you need a bounds, and that's helpful when you're doing things like flying to. And just as a little example here, I'll show how you can practically use these bounds. So say, for example, actually, there's a little bounds drawing tool here. If I can't see it because Zoom things are hiding parts of my screen, but let's see if I can click on this little drawing tool and say, I want the bounds for just Minneapolis, St. Paul, get as best as I can get them. So over here, it says the user drawn bounding box is now this array. And just for example, we have a fly to example from Mapbox GLJS. Fly to bounds example. Yeah, fit map to a bounding box. Great. Okay, so this thing, if you click, will fit to Kenya. And if you check out the code, so let's open that in CodePen. You will see that there is a fit bounds, and then there's this bounds array. So I can just, instead of having to go look up the top left corner and the bottom right corner, longitude and latitude, I can just go to location helper, copy that bounds box that I just drew on the map. And then now when I click fit to Kenya, it will not go to Kenya, but it will go to Minneapolis. So just a really quick example there. Okay, so that's the location helper. That was a lot of fun to resurrect a little bit and spruce up. So we rebuilt it in React, and we actually were able to add add some like nice controls here with these copy buttons and things like that. So if you have any ideas for how we can make this better, there's a couple people who have been very vocal in the Mapbox Discord with ideas, and like a lot of times those ideas get implemented very quickly because they're great ideas. So go ahead and let us know if you have any ideas for that.
Hey, Chris,
Yes.
We got a question in the chat. So Richard, feel free to clarify, but he asks, is there a Python example? I believe as in like a fly to example, but for Mapbox in Python. I'm not aware of anything, but I figured
Not one
I'd ask.
that I'm familiar. I know they're out there. I don't know that there's any official one on our website that's as easy to copy and paste as the one I just showed in our examples. But the behind the scenes, it's all web development, so you should be able to figure that out. By all means, like go into the Discord, and we'll be happy to help you locate one of those. There's probably some other Python folks doing GLJS work in there as well. So okay. Next one I want to show is GeoJSON.io. So this has been a staple of my toolkit for a very long time. And I in the fall of last year, I had the opportunity to spruce it up a little bit, which was great, and bring in the latest Mapbox GLJS library and bring in the globe and all that stuff. So it mostly is unchanged, has been around for many years, but very simply allows you to start drawing and editing GeoJSON. So a lot of times people will start from scratch here and just use the drawing tools, and you could literally, if you want to get down to the sidewalk level, you could start tracing a property, or you could just get a rough outline of a country, for example, just by clicking on the map. So this is using Mapbox GLJS draw or Mapbox GL draw. And you can see after I close that polygon on the right here, we get this GeoJSON feature collection. We also recently added the ability to like zip these up. So if you have a really long feature collection, you could explore it a little bit. There's also a table view, and you'll notice that this geometry I just drew, or this feature I just drew, has no properties. So if they had properties, they would show up here, but we could start adding properties, right? So we could just say name, and we can say Sudan, and we'll hit save. The other thing that's neat about this is you can actually use the URL parameters. We'll get to that in just a moment. So the way I use this usually is, if I ever need to draw GeoJSON, I can switch the base map. So I can switch to like OSM. I could zoom in on an area that I'm more familiar with here and like see what features are on the map on the given tile set. And then, if I wanted to trace a building footprint, for example, I could just do that with the polygon tool. So a lot of times I'll use it for that, and then you clean up the data elsewhere, or you just bring it into your project, or you upload it in the studio or whatever. The other thing you can do here is add what's called simple style properties. And simple style is a spec that was written just to store basic styling information along with GeoJSON. And GeoJSON IO will actually respect that. So if you change the fill color, for example, it'll show up here. So it's useful for like if you wanted to visualize a bunch of data, kind of just for testing purposes, but not really as part of your whatever you're building. You can kind of add these little simple styles so that they aren't all the same, just gray dull polygon, and you can help tell them apart. This is helpful when you have overlapping features and things like that, so you can kind of see where things are. But I wanted to share one of the really powerful ways that people use GeoJSON IO, and I do this all the time, is kind of as a preview when you're doing like code-based spatial data manipulation, right? So if you look on the little help here and scroll down, you'll see GeoJSON IO API, and you'll see this URL API. So basically, if you can pass in a data, this little hash attribute here, data colon application, you can actually pass in GeoJSON as part of the URL. And how that looks right here in this example is, here is just a simple line string with 2 coordinates, but it was passed in via the URL. I didn't draw it, I didn't load it from a file, it's just part of the URL. So to go a little bit further in that, I do see a question about GLJS respecting simple style. I don't think that's the case, but it's fairly easy to implement that if you had to. Okay, so here, what am I going to bring up? Let's open. Yeah, so I have a little node script here, and I want to show you how this works. So in here, I have a line string, and I'm basically going to show like some very basic spatial data processing here, and I'm going to use turf to actually modify this line string. So I've written a little function here that just says preview in GeoJSON IO, and all it does is take my GeoJSON and pass it through encode URL. Sorry, it stringifies it first, and then it passes it through encode URL, so it'll like encode the make URL safe characters. And then it passes it to this open package, and open in Node is just going to open the URL in my my default web browser. So if I run this, let's run node script.js. This will open GeoJSON IO, and here's my line string. So I just drew this like zigzaggy line in the middle of the US. But now I want to do some like manipulation to it. So what if I import turf buffer from @turf/buffer. And turf isn't necessarily one of our developer tools, but we sponsored it in the past, and it's definitely a critical part of manipulating spatial data in a JavaScript environment in Node. But basically, this will allow me to add a buffer. So let's say I wanted to, const buffered line equals turf buffer. And what am I going to pass into turf buffer? I'll pass in the line string, which is GeoJSON. And let's pass in a distance of, let's do like 1 mile. And then I think I have to pass in an object here for options that says units : miles. And let's sanity check that first and just say console.log buffered line and comment this out. So I'm going to log it to the console first just to make sure it works. Seems to be reasonable. And then now let's pass this to GeoJSON IO so we can see it. So right, I have no front end for this, but GeoJSON IO is my front end. I can just kind of throw data up to it. So let's run this code, and it'll pass that buffered line. Okay, so that's not a very big buffer. So let's change that to, let's do like a 20-mile buffer. And we'll save that and run it. Okay, so there you have it. So that becomes my development workflow. But from there's also command line packages you can use that will, you can pipe your GeoJSON output from a script directly into like this, function that'll call it, that'll pass it to GeoJSON IO as part of the URL parameters. So this can be a helpful way to just quickly throw it on a map, just so you can sanity check it and make sure it looks right when you're doing this kind of spatial data manipulation in code, and you can't really see it until you put it on a map. So that's helpful. Yeah, lots of great things I would love to do here as well. I will also call attention to the fact that this is open source. So let's go to github.com/mapbox/geojson.io. And you can see the history of it going way back to 2014. But I also want to draw your attention to, oh, I can't right now, but if you look at the pull requests, you'll see that, you know, there are contributions from the community happening here. So for example, yesterday we brought in a pull request from a user who basically restoring the simple style spec marker attributes, because like there's actually part of the simple style spec that allows you to just add, well, actually here, I'll just show you. So if I have a marker here and I add the property marker symbol, you can actually make that into a Mackie icon. So instead of here, I could say aerial way, and it'll give me a nice little like cable car icon, or I can use a number or a letter. So if I do 6, it'll show a 6. And if I do a letter G, it'll show, whoops, it needs to be a quote. It'll show a G. Okay, so these are things that like we removed when we were working on it last fall, and then immediately people were like, of course I'm using that, put it back. So finally, these are all back, which is great. Okay, cool. So that's GeoJSON.io. Let us know what your improvements are. I have a very strong desire to rebuild this in React, so it's a little more easy for people to contribute to. Can you use an SVG for a marker? I don't think so. It's not part of the spec, and that would be something we'd have to build in. But you can use the Mackie icons, which are kind of a smaller set of SVGs. I see the question there. Okay, so playgrounds. All right, let's go take a look at the developer playgrounds. So if you go to docs.mapbox.com/playground, you'll see a large list of developer playgrounds. So the goal of these is all just to help you grok and understand the Mapbox APIs in a graphical interface. So they're not quite demos of like what a full end user experience would look like that's well designed, but they are definitely, you know, the API call itself is a first-class citizen. You'll see what I mean there, because we're always showing you the request that is made and allowing you to inspect the response. So it's these are kind of great places for you to understand kind of what the capabilities are of our APIs. So for example, we'll start with the directions API. So, you know, instead of like if you were just reading the docs and you had to craft an API call, you'd have to go find some coordinates and you'd have to, you know, make sure they're in the right place, and then craft out, you know, build out this sentence and then, or build out this API call URL, you know, use Postman or whatever to send it, and then you'll get a bunch of JSON back, and you wouldn't necessarily be sure what you were looking at. Same problem until you mapped it. So this basically does it for you. So if I just click the marker here in New York, and then I move out here to, you know, somewhere in Pennsylvania, it just made an API call to for me to the directions API, and I can actually see what that looks like now, and it's kind of bolded all the different URL parameters, so I can easily see that alternatives equals true, geometries equals GeoJSON, and this gives you an idea of kind of what it's asking for, and then what are the possibilities. So I can say what is geometries and what happens if I change it. So all the parameters, you know, this is a UI that's very much built around the URL parameters themselves, not what an end user would see in your app, but you can kind of see the full suite of things. So I'll also add, you know, we recently added, like Mapbox launched route notifications last week. So I got to work personally on implementing that in this playground. But for example, you know, you can now specify that you have a very tall vehicle. I don't know who's driving a 24-foot tall vehicle, but if I were to set that as my max height, you'll see I now have these little notifications. And if you look in the JSON response, all this stuff is in there. So this is just kind of an example of how you could take this JSON response with, let's look at the legs and let's look at the notifications. So, you know, if I'm inspecting this JSON response, I see that there are notifications in here, and this is a max height violation, right? So you get back all this data. There's lots you can do with it, but this is just one way to show how it could be used in an end user app. And there's lots and lots of other things you can try here in terms of how the API will respond. You can also do multiple coordinates. So if you click again on the map, it'll add you can add multiple stops to your route. So you can see, here's what it would take to go from New York City to Williamsport to Scranton, etc. We also were able to add this last fall where you can actually search in here. So if you don't know the coordinates of a place and you don't necessarily even want to click on the map to find it, you could search for, Toledo, Ohio. And it'll just add it. So now we have 4 waypoints for this route, and it's going to take us all over the place. So anyway, that's the Directions API Playground. Definitely check that out. What else did I want to cover? Let's see, Geocoding API Playground. So the geocoding API does what you would expect it to do, but you'll usually see it behind a search input, or maybe abstracted behind one of our JavaScript libraries that uses it. But I can search for Paris, France, not Paris baguette, but Paris, France. And here it comes up in the list, and all kinds of other things you can set here, like the proximity, right? So this has no proximity set. So if I search for Paris, it's kind of searching the entire world, and it's not going to give me answers that are nearby me. So with this playground, I can actually set a proximity point, and basically this little crosshairs on the map is now going to be the center point for my searches. So if I search for Paris again, I'm getting lots of Paris baguettes here in Manhattan. But if I were to change the center point and then search for Paris again, I get lots of results, and I get Paris, France in the list, but I also get a lot of results here over in Arizona. So this will give you the ability to just move things around, and you can see the API call and explore kind of what you're getting back in the response. So definitely check out the Geocoding API Playground. We also have a Searchbox API Playground, and the difference between the two is, Searchbox is much more designed around interactive search, whereas geocoding is more of a traditional geocoder. It works for interactive search, but the intent of Searchbox, which is just launched a few weeks ago, is to be a much more oriented around interactive search, and not just for location search, but for like points of interest and like coffee shops and things like that as well. So very similar interface to the Geocoding API Playground, but you have the full reach and data behind the Searchbox API. So you can search for things like coffee as a category near where you are, and it'll bring you up, coffee shops, and you'll probably find less of those over in the Geocoding API. Another fun one is the Isochrone API Playground. So we do have an Isochrone service here at Mapbox, and if you're not familiar with what an isochrone is, it's basically a shape of how far you can get in a certain mode of travel from a certain location. So this visual basically right here is showing how far, if you are driving with traffic, with real-time traffic, or I guess normal traffic, how far you can get in 10 minutes from this starting point in New Jersey, right? So these show a very interesting picture of accessibility, and they are also useful for intersecting with. So you may not ever actually want to show the isochrone, but say, for example, you were here and you wanted to give the user a list of car repair shops, within 10 minutes. This would be the shape that you do a spatial join with on your data set. So you can sometimes, the isochrone is useful behind the scenes, even if you're not actually displaying it. And then other times it's actually interesting to just display it on its own. And you'll see apps that just always that literally show the isochrone, and it's always such a fascinating way to, when you have a giant landmass like this and a grid of streets, they turn out to be these kind of diamond shaped things. And then when there's highways involved and there's waterfronts and other boundaries, they all kind of take a life of their own. So you can also change the colors of these things. I did notice when I was tinkering with this earlier that these also include simple style spec in the response. So if you actually change, let's see, for example, if we change the contour line color here to blue, that's actually simple style spec also. So let's go look at the properties, and we'll see fill, and we'll see fill color. Sorry, fill color is duplicate. I think there's some duplicates of the same thing in here, but fill is the actual simple style spec color, but it's basically giving you back some additional helpful color stuff so that you can actually display it differently if you want to. So that's the Isochrone API. playground, which is great. And last but not least, I'll show the tile query. Actually, no, there's two more. The static images API playground is a lot of fun. So we have an API that will get you a static image. So you don't have to load a map every single time. If you just want a picture of a map, that's a lot better for putting into a receipt or putting into an email or putting into an MMS message, which Connor was working on recently. But you can change the dimensions and really actually see in real time what this would look like without having to just call the API a million times on your own and open up the image as it downloads. So if I change my dimensions, I could do a 500 by 500 pixel square image. And this is what it will actually look like. You can swap out the style, and you can also define it with a bounding box or a center point, that sort of thing. Let's see what we can do here with bearing. Let's do like a bearing of 45 degrees. Interesting. And let's do a pitch of like 40 degrees. Yeah, so you can bend these to your will, but get back an image that's really useful, and you can use it anywhere you would put an image. And there's also an overlay feature, so you can grab some GeoJSON from GeoJSON.io and throw it into here, or this would be a good way to add a marker if you're trying to actually show, like on a receipt, for example, where something happened. You can just add a marker to the image as part of the API call. So for example, if we just added a marker, let's do add overlay. Whoops, we need coordinates. Well, let's go to the location helper and get some coordinates. Location helper. So let's find some coordinates for San Francisco. San Francisco, California. Yeah, let's grab this. Let's grab these coordinates. So we do longitude, latitude. Let's see what we get back. Oops. Let's go back to the static images API playground. Let's add an overlay. So there's our marker. Cool. So we could color that if we wanted to, but it's it's just drawing it into the image, which is cool. Okay, so I think I see a question there about, is there a solution for routing for retail? So we have an optimization API, and yeah, that's for like planning deliveries, but we do not have, well, we do have a playground for that. I'm not going to show it right now because I'm not prepared to do that, but maybe Connor, you can throw a link to that in the chat if you can find it. Optimization V2 playground is what it's called.
Absolutely. It'll be linked soon.
Cool. Okay, so there's that. And then last but not least is a tile query API. So for those of you familiar with vector tiles, the map you see here is made of vector tiles, which are kind of chunks of the world that are chopped up into small squares. So that's how, when you load a map of just this area, we're not downloading a map of the entire world to show in your browser. We're only grabbing the chunks of it that we need. But the vector, the tile query API allows you to actually send a request back to Mapbox's servers to get features from the tile, right? So for example, on this tile, there are street features making these lines. There are building footprint features making these little building footprints. There's this point of interest for this restaurant. There's this park. So if you just click on the map, you'll see that it's doing an API call back to Mapbox and then requesting features from this tile that are within a certain distance from the point that I clicked. So I can actually make this radius a little bigger. So we have a nice little radius drawing here and say, give me back things within this radius in the tile and make that a much higher limit. And then you can inspect all these and say, okay, this one is a building. This one is a house number label. So there's lots of things that you might not think are a geometry, but they end up being their own feature in the tile because, like, when you zoom in far enough, you might want to actually start putting addresses onto the buildings. So you can also filter the layers and make sure it's not, tell it exactly what type you want to pull out, what type of information you want to pull out. But this is a great way to, like, a lot of people will use this actually as like a kind of like a geocoder. And it's like, if you can imagine, instead of like building footprints and cafes and things like that, we have a tile set that's just got all the counties in a state. And I just want to send back, I send up a request for this point and just want to know which county it intersects with. That's actually another use case for the tile query API. So go ahead and play around with that. That's a lot of fun. And that's our playgrounds. So by all means, we want to support whatever your needs are. So a lot of times, not every single parameter is identified here. So if something's missing, let us know, and literally me and Connor, who can implement these and build them and make them meet your needs. Can you use a bounding box?
Yeah. Interesting question.
Can you use a custom bounding box for the tile query API instead of a circle radius? I don't think so. So I would love to get back to you on that one, but I think it's all based on the point that you click on. But you could definitely process, you could set a large radius and then do a turf. You could use turf in your browser, for example, or one of the native variations of turf to then restrict those results to a bounding box. So that might be a way you could approach that. Okay. Let's move on to some design tools. So the Mackie icon editor. So if you're not familiar with Mackie icons, you'll see these in our styles. Usually they're very small and they're in circles, but like they are, part of the design. There's a whole design philosophy here. If you want to click on the design guidelines here for what makes good glyphs on a map. But you can see we've got a grocery store here and we've got a castle here. So if you're using Mapbox's core styles, then all this design work was done for you. But a lot of people, when they use Mapbox, want to really bring their designers in and really customize the way everything on the map looks and feels down to the icons. So you might use this editor to upload your own icon. Like you can actually bring your own icons in here, and it'll help you do some certain things to get them ready for the map. Or you can just take the icons we have already and change the way they behave, right? So you can change the color. So let's say we wanted to make all these. Actually, let's click on this group first, and we'll change color to blue or green. No, let's do like a blue. But then this will also allow you to add like a nice little icon stroke. So even if you already have an SVG, this will help you do some things to that SVG just to prepare it for being viewed on the map. So like right now we could do a dark outline, which doesn't look very good, or we could do a gray outline. Actually, I'm just going to not do an outline because I don't want that. But if you look at the background part down here, we could do like a circle background, and we could change that circle to like white with a black stroke or a gray stroke. Let's make that stroke a little bit bigger. Okay, so I'm making these little circular icons. I'm no designer, but you get the idea here. The other part of it is you can download this as an entire set, and like this is a front end only thing, so it's not storing in a database anywhere, but the downloadable collection you can actually just drag back in here. So it becomes a way for you to like save this collection of icons. But effectively to use them, you end up having to like upload them individually to Studio. But this is a great place to kind of curate them all at once and see how they're all going to look in kind of a nice layout. And you can also split them into groups. So yeah, if this is helpful to you, we'd love to hear how you're using it. But a lot of people will spend some time with this before they start tinkering with Studio to make their custom maps. We also have Map Icon Editor, which is for the transit and highway shields. So very similar interface. Let's see, Mapbox. I don't know if I can find it actually. Let's see. Let's go to docs.mapbox.com/resources/dev-tools. Yes. Okay. So same kind of experience here, but here, click on the editor part. Yeah, so you can see that there's highway shield. Basically this will let you change the colors that these have in common if you wanted to change them to match your desired map style. Because you can do all this stuff in Studio to change like what the water looks like, and you can change what the land looks like, and you change what the highways look like, but the actual like icons that show up are SVGs. So that that's a kind of separate process to style these to your needs and then upload them to replace the existing icon set. So I think you get the idea here, but same kind of thing where you can download these and then store them and then move them into wherever you want to use them later. But this just gives you some control to tinker with these little color palette things and see what the end result would look like. So that's useful. Then of course we have Mapbox Studio, which we have a whole other webinar on that, but if you're not familiar with it, Actually, I'll fire it up in a moment because I'm going to do kind of a live demo on it. But this is it's kind of like Illustrator for map building, and you can kind of customize each layer. But we'll show you that in just a moment. Okay, sorry, I'm going to bring this up in just a sec. Last one I wanted to show is cartogram. Of course, I need to put Mapbox on there. So cartogram is a lot of fun because it's basically it'll kind of do some like, there's no AI or anything behind it, but it's, it'll definitely do a style based on an image, right? So it'll take your image and look at kind of the main colors that are present in it, and then start making that into a map style, right? So when you don't have a lot of your own data to change, but you just want to use like our streets data that is like this robust map of the world, and then you want to apply your own styles to it, you could bring in your company logo, or you could bring in like a picture that you really resonate with. So I have this little picture of Ren and Stimpy, and I'll just use that as an example. But if I drop this here, you can see what it did is it has searched this image and said, okay, I'm going to pull. I found like 4 main colors on Stimpy here. And I can actually move these little markers around to experiment with this. And then I could just bring this into Studio or bring it right into my Mapbox project. So this is probably a lesser well-known tool, but it is a lot of fun and can be a great starting point if you're trying to do a custom colored map. And say, for example, I don't like, roads shouldn't be the red, roads should be the white. And let's say water should not be this gray, but it should be Stimpy's nose, which is blue. And the green space should maybe be Stimpy's tongue. You get the idea here, but you can kind of tinker around with an existing palette on an image and then see what that looks like. Let's see, where's the land? So I think it put the land on. Let's do the labels should be white, and let's do the land to be Stimpy red. Okay, so this is hideous, but you get the idea of this is that it kind of can sample your color palette from an image and then give you a good starting point. So here's what that looks like when you're zoomed all the way out. This is the Stimpy world. So cartogram's a lot of fun. Okay, DXF to GeoJSON. So to my surprise, actually, I think in Discord we've seen like, I don't know, it feels like one person a month shows up saying, how can I convert a DXF into GeoJSON? And I actually wasn't even aware of this tool like a year ago when I started at Mapbox, but I discovered it after somebody asked about it. I searched and then found like, oh, somebody already built a tool for that. So we kind of resurrected it and spruced it up a little bit recently. But this is great because it kind of helps you with the hard part. Like if you get into the nuts and bolts of SVGs or any other vector format, it's all just coordinates, right? So writing code to change those is not that hard, but the hard part is positioning it on the globe in the coordinate system of the world, right? So that's what this really helps you with. So let's grab a DXF, which I have on my desktop here, and we're going to drag this in. So a lot of times DXFs you'll find for laser cutters and things like that. For this little demo, I think it's a lot of fun because I have this compass rose, and I actually want to turn this into GeoJSON, but put it, so let's see, the map is locked, but let's move this over to, I want to put this in the Pacific Ocean somewhere. So let's I'm going to move this right over here and say, if I bring in this DXF of a compass, I can now resize it. And let's say I want to put a compass rose right here in the eastern part of the Pacific Ocean. And if I hit pin to map, so this just helps me position it, but I can also rotate it if I wanted to. I don't have any reason to do that. But let's just leave it like that. So if I pin to map, it immediately turns into GeoJSON, and this is actually now pinned, stuck on the map as a layer in this tool. And if I hit save, it'll just download it. And that's a lot of fun. What I can also do is bring that into, geojson.io if I wanted to start adding attributes and properties to it. So let's do that. So here's my out.json, which I used from DXF to GeoJSON. And now I've got this cool like compass rose on the map. And then you can also bring that into Mapbox Studio. So let's go to studio.mapbox.com. And I won't do it just in front of you, but I think I already built a compass rose demo here. where I brought in this compass and I put it on the dark style and I just made it gray. So like here are my 2 layers, which I didn't name very well, but there's actually like a broader, like the north, south, east, west on here is like a fill, so it has to be behind everything. So I just made that one darker gray, and then the foreground elements are all lighter gray. And this is just a tile set in Mapbox Studio. So for example, if I wanted to change, I'm not sure which one is which, so let's try it. So looks like this is the background. So we'll leave that dark, and then the foreground, we could change the color to, to make it more blue or like blue-gray. So this is Mapbox Studio, which again, we have a whole set of webinars on, but you can see all the different layers in here, but you have fine control over literally every part of this map, and you can change the way borders look, you can change the way labels look. And people spend many hours really customizing the way the maps look. But I think for DXF, this is like a fun way to like throw things that are not necessarily geographic into the map. I do see a question about, can files other than DXF be used? No, but I've already started tinkering with SVG, just because at the end, like DXF, the underlying library that's doing all this actually converts it to SVG anyway. So I think there's just another little transformation step, and then we could open up to some other vector formats. So yeah, so please, let me know what else you'd love to see out of DXF to GeoJSON. Okay.
Did you see there's a second question?
No. What does it say?
It says, how could I connect Mapbox to my database manager to see what my records look like?
To your database manager. Yeah, I mean, I think, it sounds like you need to build an API on top of your database. So you could do that with Node, or you could do it with any other tool that will make a web server that can take parameters and then spit out GeoJSON. So a lot of times you may have to transform that GeoJSON or transform the data that comes out of your database into something more usable on a map. But yeah, I wouldn't say that there's no connection there that you can make easily. But as long as you can script and write code, you can automate the import of your data into Mapbox's servers for tile sets, for example. So that we have Mapbox tiling service is a tool or an API that does that. So yeah, anyway, there's a million other ways to architect that. But if you want to go deeper on that, I'd be happy to talk to you over in Discord. 3D DFX, that I don't believe so, but essentially the way 3D works in our map rendering right now is that it's all extrusion based. So you can also add 3D models if you use external libraries and things like that. But that's a whole other workflow then it's not really part of the map. It's just kind of floating on top of the map in a browser. So I haven't yet encountered 3D DFX, but you could totally extrude parts of this compass rose that I drew here. Actually, you know what? Let's try it. Do I still have it open? I don't think I do. Nah, I lost it. Okay, we could try it some other time. But yeah, definitely you could extrude any of these polygons to jump out off the map.
We've got a layup question here in the chat. It says, wouldn't it be great if GeoJSON IO maps support a 3D view with elevation?
3D view with elevation.
I believe Location Helper does. I don't think GeoJSON IO does, but
it does not. We should totally do that. So Location Helper definitely has 3D terrain. So let's go to the Appalachian Mountains, for example. If you switch with this little layer switcher, which I built a couple weeks ago.
Make sure your zoom is more than 13 as well.
I see.
Oh yeah. You have to switch back to street and then now switch back. There you go.
I see. Okay. Yeah. I don't know if that's the best user experience, but we'll deal with that later. So yeah, so you can see 3D terrain in here, which is pretty cool. And this is actually built in if you wherever you want to use your map, it just consumes a little bit more data to bring down the 3D model. But yeah. Mapbox can be used as a tile provider with Leaflet. That's true. And you can also use raster tiles from Leaflet with Mapbox. And that's what we're doing, for example, here in GeoJSON.io with the OSM layer. This is just a raster layer. So, it just wraps it around the globe. Or if you switch to Mercator, this is just, this looks and feels more like a normal Leaflet style raster layer. Okay. So some third-party tools. It's about 1:15. I'm going to go through these super fast. I do want to show Color Brewer because I don't know, I've been teaching web mapping and I've been doing this for many years, and I always end up back here many times a month just to get good color palettes for, especially for data visualization. But if you just want to distribute data around the map and you don't want everything to be the same color, or you want, you know, a category-based color, for example, you could click qualitative and say, I have, you know, 7 different categories or 6 different categories, and it'll just give you these color palettes. So, you know, you can put a little more effort and design into it later, but to just get something quickly, this is a great place to start. And it gives you the hex color codes that you can use. And it also gives you, you know, if you're in JavaScript world like I am, these, you know, little array that you can just copy and paste into your code. So I find myself here all the time just to, you know, either for experimentation purposes or even just to, you know, to get color palettes to use in production. I think even yesterday, Connor and I were, we just needed like legend colors for like an example in the docs. And like, I refer to spec to here to just say, okay, what's a good 3-color palette we can use? And this is a helpful tool. I'd be remiss if I don't mention QGIS, which we use all the time. I use all the time in my workflows. But I wanted to show a quick example with QGIS. And the thing I use it for probably the most of the time is just coordinate reference changes and just like quick editing to like delete things and then export again. So GeoJSON IO is helpful for that as well. But for example, if I were to download the original source for this borough boundaries data set on the New York City Open Data Portal and open it in QGIS, let's open that. You know, the city still publishes data in its local coordinate reference system, so it's not immediately usable in tools like Mapbox because it's not using latitude and longitude coordinates, WGS 84. So as I move the mouse around here in QGIS, you can see the coordinates here are do not look anything like latitudes and longitudes because it's using a local coordinate system that's only relevant here in the eastern part of New York State. But QGIS is wonderful. I mean, there's also lots of different ways to do this with command line tools, or, you know, transform it in a database if you're in a spatial database. But if you just have files, QGIS is a wonderful way to just open up a file real quick and then do a transformation. So all I have to do is say export. I can choose GeoJSON from the list and it will be immediately usable in most Mapbox things or anything else that uses GeoJSON. There's also lots of other things to translate into if you want, of course. But more importantly, I can change the coordinate reference system to WGS 84. And let's give this a file name. We'll just call it converted boroughs.geojson. I'll save it on the desktop. And that'll bring me to the next tool. So let's hit go on that. Okay, so there it is. The purple layer is now my converted, but we're done with QGIS at this point. There's a million other things you can do in there, of course, but just wanted to bring it up. But whoops, I don't want to save this. Don't save. Okay, so I now have this converted boroughs.geojson right here. But I want to draw your attention to the fact that this is 3.7 megabytes, which is enormous because it has so much detail about the coastline and all the piers and everything like that. So that brings me to another tool, a third-party tool I use a lot, which is called MapShaper. And MapShaper does a lot of things, but the thing I use it for mostly is simplifying geometries. So if I drag in this converted boroughs GeoJSON, it'll display it. It actually shows me that there's a bunch of like line intersections in here, which are like invalid geometries. And I think it will try to fix them, maybe not. But what I like this for is the simplification because it gives you this nice little user interface for simplifying geometries. So if I hit apply here, I get a nice little slider. And as I move the slider, you'll see once I get towards the end of it. So between here, you know, this is 100% of the original size. And now I'm back down to like 20%. And the visual at this level hasn't changed much at all. So there's lots of vertices that have been removed here. And we still see there's lots of detail around the coastline here, but I don't need this level of detail if I just want like, you know, rough shapes for the boundary, you know, for these borough boundaries. So I can keep going further and get rid of the piers and they become, you know, more blob-like. We're not using this for, you know, legal purposes or anything like that. We just want them for visual purposes. And look, this is 0.74% of the original size, which is huge, right? So if I export this, let's take a look at how big this is now. This simplified GeoJSON. So this is now 31 kilobytes down from, what was it before?
3.5
3.5
megabytes.
megabytes. Yeah. So, this is a really helpful tool for that sort of thing. And then I think that'll wrap us up. Actually, no, I want to show the contribute app. So anywhere you see a Mapbox map, you will see this little thing down here that says improve this map. And I don't know if anyone here has ever actually clicked on this before, but what that does is it brings you to our contribute app. So this isn't really a developer tool, but because you are, it's anyone who's using your map can actually do this, but because you are a Mapbox developer and are even more interested than your end user in having the highest quality data, this is basically how you can give us corrections to the map. So if you click this contribute button, you can add an address or you can correct an address. You can add a business or correct a business. You can add a road where there is no road or where a road was just recently built. So we have lots of different data sources we collect all this stuff from, but a important data source is the users who are on the ground who can just say the speed limit is wrong here. There's an incident here. There's a weight restriction on this bridge. And you can actually get an email back when we actually integrate these changes. So this gives you the power to make sure that your Mapbox maps have the latest data, and you can do this contribution right here from any Mapbox map. So encourage you to check that out, especially if you find something that you want to change. And then last but not least, you've probably all used the docs quite a bit, but Connor and I spent a lot of time in there trying to improve these, and I want to give a special shout out to this little button right here that says share your feedback. So you probably see these on a lot of docs systems that you use and you don't know if anyone's really listening. So I'm here to tell you right now in this webinar that Connor and I are absolutely listening, and we get multiple of these per day. But if you click on this, you can report a problem, and click on these buttons and write us a little message. We get these and we react to them. So about half the feedback we get is actionable. So this isn't a place for tech support, but it is a place for, you found, we updated our API and we didn't change, the wording of one little paragraph on here and it's become confusing. You can play a part in helping us improve these docs, and that's with these reports. So that's my final shout out, just because I have a captive audience of developers. But I really hope that you've enjoyed this overview of developer tools, and we would really love to hear your ideas for new tools that don't exist yet that would really help you in your workflows, or improvements to these existing tools.
I've got two things.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So one, Chris is right. We are definitely listening to the button. A huge percentage of my workflow comes from responding directly to the feedback that goes into the feedback that's in that button. And second, we have another question. They say, helpful demo. Can you share what you're working on next? I know we're trying to get SVGs working in the DXF mapper, but is there anything else that we could talk about that I'm forgetting?
I think the top of mind for me right now is still kind of some kind of expressions playground, because expressions, there's a really long list of documentation for them that show you, technically how they work, but not how they work in practice. So I want to have some kind of playground where you can tinker with expressions in a much easier format than go, like you can mess with expressions in Studio. But I think Studio might still just be a little too much UI and a immersive experience for doing a whole web map design when you just want to tinker with a small layer style. So something that helps with expressions, will help with that. So I have some mock-ups and some prototypes that I built, but we haven't really gotten that far yet. I also mentioned porting GeoJSON.io over to React will actually open up the door to a lot more libraries that we can help for the table layout improvements and other features and stuff like that. So someday we'll get to that, but that's something that is still on my list. I see one more question about webinars on Tippecanoe. I don't think so, but we'll keep that in mind. If there's enough demand for it, we do something like that. But I think that more or less lives behind the scenes. So yeah, probably not something we're going to cover. Web GPU, not something I can comment on in this forum either. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? I think we'd have to do like a deeper dive with the engineers if we want to talk about Web GPU. Okay, any other questions before we sign off? I think this has been fun, but yeah, for sure, try these things out and let us know. Awesome. I'm glad the DXF stuff is great. Okay, so that'll take us out. We'll just say goodbye and we'll see you at the next one. So jump in the Discord if you want to chat with us afterwards. And thank you so much for tuning in today. See you at the next one.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.